What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for watching. Welcome back to Rants and Headaches. And in this video, I'll be talking about why I am pro-choice. Now, the first thing that I want to say is that I'm not the biggest fan of the pro-choice movement. Aside from a lot of bad arguments, I kind of like to describe the pro-choice movement as wacky and a little evil. I think people definitely go to these weird extremes to justify certain things, which I'm not a fan of. I think there's a lot of bad actors in the pro-choice movement. I feel like just about any movement, someone somewhere is going to let you down. Like, at some point, it's just not going to be what you want it to be. So before I go any further, just to be clear, that there's generally a lot of things to criticize about just about any movement. But yeah, there's just a lot of people in the movement I just don't have respect for. There's a lot of arguments they make I don't have respect for. Things like that. So while I do consider myself pro-choice, do not expect me to see me at any pro-choice events or donating to pro-choice activist groups anytime soon. Not that I never would. It would really depend on that specific event or group or whatever. So before I get into my reasons, I do want to talk briefly about a lot of the bad arguments that I've seen from the pro-choice movement, okay? A lot of y'all like to argue. I understand not believing that life begins at conception. Personally, I believe that life begins at the heartbeat. That's pretty much how we define death, so I really don't see what the issue is with that perspective. But for those of you who argue that life doesn't begin until the baby is like out and takes its first actual breath, I don't know what to do with y'all. Like, I am a little confused by that. That just doesn't make any sense. The fetus has grown. The fetus has fed. The fetus has done several things at that point before birth that would lead us to call it something that's alive. Access to abortion is something that's very important to a lot of people. I am not trying to shit on anybody who wants to fight for abortion rights for a variety of reasons. But I think one of the problems with this becoming such an emotional issue for people is that they just start making these emotional arguments. And emotion aside, I don't think you can really make a valid argument that life does not begin until the first actual breath. You've got a beating heart, you've got a thing with lungs. I'm not a baby person, okay? I'm not. It's fed, it's grown, like it's met several standards at this point, aside from being a separate person with separate individual DNA. Life begins at some point before birth. Okay? I don't understand people who make that argument. That's just, it's never made sense to me, and I feel like it's just a matter of trying to trick people, and that's kind of a matter of why I don't mess with conservatism anymore, because once I realized I was being tricked and lied to kind of push me into a certain viewpoint, it was kind of like, oh, you guys are full of shit. Well, okay, guess I won't listen to you anymore. Yeah, that's kind of how seriously I take the pro-choice crowd. Now, as a result of a lot of pro-choicers pushing this view that life does not begin until the first breath after birth, a lot of people who have abortions do not believe they have ended a life. But one thing that I do find disturbing about the pro-choice movement, for those who do believe that they've ended a life, to then go out and celebrate it, I just, like, when I see these videos on TikTok of these leftist women celebrating that they got to kill another baby, like, what? That is disturbing to me and infuriating to me. It's one thing to believe you have not ended a life, but to believe that you have and to think it's something to celebrate, and I am pro-choice technically, but that's not the kind of thing I fuck with. I think that's really shitty behavior, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend I think otherwise just because I think people should have the right to an abortion. Also, look, I am not saying that inclusivity does not matter, but I think the pro-choice movement is so caught up in just emotion and other shit that the reality just doesn't fucking mean anything anymore, and I hate it. I am not a fan of, and I will never use the phrase, birthing person. You are no better than an extreme Republican making statements that a woman's only purpose on this earth is to reproduce for the sake of their husbands having kids. That is such disgusting language. It is so vile, and I hate it so fucking much. And this argument that it's the only way to be inclusive to people who are trans or no. I'm the wrong one to play that game with. It's just, y'all are like, I want my identity to be respected and stuff. So the only way for that to happen is if other people's identity just don't get recognition at all and are erased and wiped out. Like, what kind of selfish attitude is that? But even aside from the fact that I think it comes from a very selfish place, you use phrases like birthing person, it is such an extreme disrespect to women. I am more than my womb. I am more than my ability or my desire to give birth. Period. Do not tell me that you are better than sexists in other movements and other groups if you ever use the term birthing person. I will die on this hill. Go ahead and leave your argument if you want to. I don't really care. I don't see my view on that one changing anytime soon. Another thing the pro-choice movement does that I really don't like is push this idea that if you're in a situation where you're pregnant and you don't want to be, that an abortion is the only way out. So they basically push this mindset that you can't survive, you can't still continue to pursue your dreams or do the other things you want to do with your life if you have a child. Now, don't get me wrong, having a kid is a huge responsibility and it should be viewed as such. And I hate it when pro-lifers argue children are not a burden. No, they're a burden. No, they're a burden, okay? I am a single person. If I had a baby right now, I don't think there's any area of my life that would not be impacted by that. It's a huge change and it's a huge responsibility. The only way, frankly, that having a kid doesn't burden you or change your life is if you're someone who just doesn't give a shit, and at that point the kid's probably not being taken care of properly and should be taken away from you. So for those who are in a situation where they feel like having a kid would ruin everything for me right now, I just can't take care of a kid right now, I don't blame people, I don't judge people for having that mindset. However, it's okay and it's normal to want kids. And I feel like the pro-choice movement and a lot of pro-choice people want to kind of put pressure on people. Like, if you have an unexpected pregnancy, like, it's just go have an abortion, don't worry about it, don't think about it. It's like, no, it's a huge decision and it's an individual decision. And for those who do want to have that kid and still pursue other things in life, that's perfectly fine and that shouldn't be shit on. And I kind of feel like that one isn't too prevalent on the pro-choice side. I see that more among activists who tend to make the movement itself look bad, but it is something that bothers me. And the last thing I want to say about the pro-choice movement before I get to my own perspectives is that I do not think it's a good thing for the pro-choice movement to downplay the negative impacts on women of abortion. A lot of women regret their abortions for many different reasons. For one thing, you have women who believe they're doing nothing wrong and then later come to the belief that they have taken an innocent human life, and that is a huge burden to bear. In addition to that, abortion, just like any medical procedure, something can go wrong. People act like a lot of this stuff is zero risk, and that's not true. No medication, no medical procedure comes with zero risk. And it's just a lie for the pro-choice movement to act like abortion is the best thing that's ever happened to women. It's like the best medical advancement ever. And that's not true. That's not real. I mean, I guess that's kind of a matter of opinion, but this idea that there's no downside ever to having an abortion, and kind of sweeping under the rug women who speak out because they regret an abortion. Like, no, it's relevant. And someone who's considering an abortion should have all the facts and should hear both perspectives, not just one side. And if you really believe in choice, then that shouldn't be considered something wrong to say. Abortion can be very harmful. Just because you're in a situation where you want an abortion doesn't mean it's the best thing for you. And I feel like a lot of pro-choicers kind of gloss over that, and I'm not a fan of that mentality. But without further ado, let me go ahead and get into my own views here on what it means to be pro-choice and why I am pro-choice. So I would say like a few years ago, I was at a point where I felt like life begins at the heartbeat. Therefore, any abortion before the heartbeat, which is actually the majority of them, by the way, is not wrong. But I would, in theory, be open to any pro-life legislation that outlawed abortion after the heartbeat began. Pro-life legislation is a goddamn mess, and the pro-life movement has been taken over by absolute extremists, and yikes. There's so many things they are putting in pro-life legislation that hurt women that have nothing to do with preserving life. However, I am at the point where, yes, I do believe life begins at the heartbeat, but I support abortion throughout the entire pregnancy. I do believe that laws should protect human life, so why is this some exception? My argument is very simple. I'm not going to kind of make excuses about what abortion is. I'm not going to sit here and lie about abortion being the greatest thing that's ever happened for women, or any of that other nonsense. My view is this. The government should never force me to use my body to sustain the life of somebody else. Period. Let's say you need something I have, a bone marrow transplant, a kidney transplant, whatever. The fact that it's urgent, the fact that you need that to save your life is completely irrelevant to the fact that I have rights over my own body, and I should not have to give you anything. Now, that being said, I despise late-term abortion. I hate it. I think you should be able to make a decision and do something before it gets that late in the pregnancy. I realize people can be in very awful, miserable situations. I do believe that you're ending a life, and especially when it gets to the third trimester, you are absolutely doing something to someone who can feel. And I think that I think abortion procedures are awful at that point. I really do. So this idea that all pro-choice people are pro-abortion, I absolutely hate that mindset. It's very ignorant. It's like people who say that, it's like, God, you have never once listened to just an everyday pro-choice person. You might have turned on the activists and heard what they had to say, but you have never actually had a conversation with someone with just an everyday person who is pro-choice, have you? I was having a discussion with someone and someone said, like, so if someone has an abortion the day before the due date, you don't think there's any moral question there? That's not the point. I do think that there's a really big moral question there, but it's about legality. If we're talking about the right to an abortion, we're talking about what people should be able to legally do and not do. So what I think of whether or not something is right or wrong is kind of besides the point at that point. If you are using my life to sustain yours, it should still be absolutely up to me what happens. And having said all that, I just want to insert something here really quickly. Yes, I do think late-term abortion is tragic and wrong. There are very few circumstances where I have believed that a late-term abortion was understandable. So situations where someone learns something very late in the pregnancy about a risk to their body or something like that. And I think a lot of people, more on the pro-life side, I suppose, like to talk about pregnancy and birth as if it's zero risk. Like on the pro-choice side, you have them pushing the lie that abortion is never, ever, ever, ever harmful. But then on the pro-life side, you have them pushing these lies that pregnancy and birth can never hurt you. Well, first of all, it hurts, from what I hear. So you know when a woman gives birth and she has a really difficult pregnancy and labor and whatever, and you know she says it's so awful, but then like a few months later she's like, I want to have another kid. I forget what it's called, but there's something that happens where in your brain where like mentally you're able to forget or erase the actual pain of giving birth. It's very fascinating to read about. But anyways, that's one thing I don't like about the pro-life movement. They really want to gloss over the fact that pregnancy and birth can actually, like, literally pose a risk to your life. They really gloss over that, like, heavily. And I can't stand that shit. Or for those who try to argue that abortion is never necessary to save the life of a mother. Like, I'm sorry, there are certain circumstances where, yes, something that is technically considered an abortion is necessary to save a mother's life. So if you're in a situation, for example, where someone needs an abortion to save their life, a lot of pro-lifers will say, well, if they're far left along in a C-section, well, some people can't just be cut open like that. You know, when it comes to the fetus, they want to be, oh, we're all about the science. No, you're not about the science whenever it's inconvenient to you. Anything that's inconvenient to you is junk science. Now, a lot of people might argue, okay, you don't believe your body should be forced by the government to sustain anyone else's life, but aren't you still taking an innocent life? And yes, and that's where I think abortion is something that should not be celebrated. It's a decision that should be thought through. I don't judge anyone who's had an abortion, but I don't believe that it's something that's necessarily right. When it comes to the topic of a woman's life being in danger, I look at it as a self-defense thing. If a mentally ill man breaks into my house and tries to kill me and I shoot him in self-defense, I should not go to jail for defending myself. The fact that this individual was so mentally ill that they might not have known what they were doing, that in some way or another they weren't fully responsible for their actions, doesn't mean I shouldn't have the right to self-defense, because in a certain sense, they were innocent. If someone is really mentally ill to the point that they're not responsible for their actions, you could argue that they are innocent due to mental illness. I kind of look at an abortion in terms of defending a mother's life the same way. Just because that fetus is not trying to kill me or making a conscious decision that they want to kill me doesn't mean I shouldn't have the right to defend myself. When it comes to other circumstances regarding abortion, like, I can kind of understand to an extent the desire to use the law to preserve human life. Objectively, that makes sense to me. But the idea that a pregnant woman shouldn't be able to defend herself in a situation where self-defense is her only option, I don't understand that viewpoint at all. Can't relate. I fully support the right to self-defense in just about any situation. And yes, that includes a pregnancy that is a risk to your life. So I would say, even though I don't like abortion, I think it's generally wrong, that is one of those circumstances, just as an example, where I would consider an abortion to not be a moral wrong. So that is ultimately some of the issues I have with the pro-choice movement and why I am personally pro-choice. Like I said, when it comes to the movement in general, I feel like there's just a lot of bad narratives and bad arguments and things that I can't really support. But I do believe that I should have the right to make medical decisions over my own body, and I do believe that I should not be forced to use my body to sustain anyone else's life. The same exact way I shouldn't be forced to go through a surgery to save somebody else. Just because their life is in danger doesn't mean my rights no longer exist. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, half this video, or even a quarter of this video, please hit the like button and don't be afraid to subscribe.